Hold a tiny bone needle between numb fingers and tell me that is not a weapon, not a spear, not a blade. A needle small enough to vanish in snow. Now strip away the modern spell. The thermostat clicks off. The walls leak. Your dry socks are gone. No synthetic coat, no pantry, no flashlight, no phone signal, no rescue truck grinding toward you through the dark. There is only wind, black air, and a body that suddenly feels badly designed for the planet it lives on. Cold does not start by killing you. It starts by taking away your hands. Your fingers stiffen. You fumble knots. You drop the scraper. You cannot cut cleanly, stitch tightly, strike sparks, carry fuel, or feed a flame without wasting movement. Then it reaches your judgment. You get slow. You get clumsy. You choose badly at the exact moment when one bad choice can spend the heat you had left. A naked human body was not the Ice Age solution. It was the problem. And the Ice Age was not one frozen postcard. It was a long, shifting stretch of climate, harsher in some places than others. The last glacial maximum, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, was one of the hardest turns of the dial, but it did not make every landscape the same. Some places punished people with deep cold, wind, short seasons, scarce fuel, and dangerous gaps between meals. Other places stayed more livable. So there was no single cave person life, no one trick, no natural toughness that explains it. The answer had to be made. Ancient humans built a portable climate around fragile skin. Sometimes that meant sewn insulation. Sometimes a guarded fire. Sometimes a wall that only had to do one thing: stop the wind from stealing the body's warmth. Sometimes it meant eating enough fat and calories to keep heat from becoming an empty promise. And sometimes it meant other people, because a body with frozen hands cannot do every job alone. Start with the physics. Skin loses heat. Wind strips away the thin, warm layer your body tries to hold against itself. Wetness is worse, because water pulls warmth out fast. Once your temperature begins to slip, your body burns more energy just defending the baseline. Walking costs more. Hunting costs more. Carrying a child costs more. Thinking clearly costs more. Warmth is not comfort. Warmth is permission to function. That is why the needle matters. We like the spear because it looks heroic, but a kill does not save anyone until the animal becomes more than meat. Hide has to be scraped, softened, cut, pierced, shaped, sewn, tied, wrapped, patched. A seam is not decoration. It is a wall you can wear. A boot is not fashion. It is a way to keep your feet useful. Bedding is not luxury. It is the difference between sleep and a slow leak of heat into frozen ground. The cruel part is that the soft stuff usually disappears. Fur, sinew, leather, plant fiber, cordage, most of the actual warmth rots away. Archaeology often gives us the hard survivors instead. Bone and ivory needles, awls, scrapers, sharp stone edges, traces of hide working. Tiny objects with a huge shadow behind them. So the first correction is simple. Ice Age survival was not written only in mammoth hunts and cave walls. It was written in repaired seams, protected embers, and hands kept warm enough to keep working. But the evidence can trick us. Caves preserve, hide walls vanish, stone remains, ordinary camps blow apart. Before we imagine the Ice Age home, we have to stop confusing what survived in the ground with how people actually survived the night. The most common Ice Age home might be the one archaeology almost never gets to show you. That is the first crack in the word caveman. It sounds like a type of person. Often, it is just a type of evidence. Stone shelters keep secrets better than open ground. The Ice Age was not one giant freezer switched on for thousands of years. Climate shifted. Cold pulses came and eased. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, ice sheets expanded, sea levels dropped, and many northern landscapes became harsher. But harsh did not mean identical. A river valley, a coast, a wooded pocket, a dry steppe, and a windswept plain could all demand different answers. So the real picture starts with a map, then immediately runs into a problem. The map of survival is not the same as the map of what survived. Picture two camps. In the first, people sleep under rock. A fire burns against a cave wall. Ash falls. A flint chip drops. A bone cracks for marrow. Someone scrapes a hide and leaves a scatter of tiny marks in the floor. Sediment slowly seals it. The roof keeps off some of the worst rain, wind, and disturbance. Thousands of years later, An archaeologist can brush down through the layers and find traces of that night. Now put the same people outside. They build where the animals pass, where fuel can be gathered, where water is close, where the wind can be broken by a bank, a ridge, brush, hide, wood, bone, or a low line of stone. It may be the smarter place to live for that season. It may be warmer, closer to food, easier to leave. Then time destroys the paperwork. Rain spreads the ash. Frost lifts the ground. Roots stir the floor. Scavengers drag bones away. Wood rots. Hide decays. Grass bedding disappears. A shelter made to be carried, burned, repaired, or abandoned is very bad at becoming a museum. That is the fossil trap. Caves did not become famous only because people loved caves. Caves became famous because geology helped them keep receipts. Not every group lived under stone. Not every open camp vanished. Archaeologists do find open-air sites, sometimes rich ones. But the record is tilted. Stone tools shout, charcoal whispers. Soft walls, lashings, sleeping mats, stitched hides, and ordinary clutter usually go silent. So the caveman picture is not exactly wrong because caves did not matter. It is wrong because it mistakes the loudest evidence for the normal life. Outside the cave mouth, the survival problem is more exposed. No friendly roof, no permanent wall, just weather, distance, and a body that needs its warmth kept close. The first home, then, is not always a cave. It is whatever you can carry against your skin. One broken seam in a boot can become a survival countdown. Not tomorrow, not after the storm, now. The split opens near the ankle. Wind pushes through. The warm air your body paid for with calories spills out with every step. First, the toes lose feeling. Then the fingers grow slow, which is cruel, because those same fingers may have to repair the damage before walking becomes impossible. In deep cold, clothing is not decoration. It is the first wall. A loose hide over the shoulders helps. A fitted garment changes the odds. It traps a thin layer of air close to the skin, lets the body warm it, then keeps the wind from dragging it away. The danger is always the gap: wrist, neck, waist, ankle, hood, sole. Cold does not need a doorway. It only needs a slit. That is why tailoring matters. A cuff that cinches. A hood that turns with the head. Footwear that flexes without gaping. Layers that can be opened while working, tightened while resting, dried when damp, patched when torn. Warmth is manufactured in shape. Watch the hands that make it. A scraper cleans flesh and fat from a hide before decay ruins it. A blade trims the edge. An awl punches holes through material too tough for a needle to force alone. Sinew or plant fiber becomes thread. Then the eyed needle comes in, small, fragile-looking, easy to lose in dirt or ash. Push, pull, tighten, repeat. A seam becomes a line of defense. The spear gets the heroic painting. The needle gets the child through the night. Most Ice Age clothing has vanished. Hide rots, fiber decays, stitches disappear unless conditions are extraordinary. So archaeology often sees the clothes through their shadows. Eyed needles, needle fragments, awls, scrapers, blades, burins, and wear traces left by scraping, piercing, cutting, and sewing. Not one lucky gadget. A whole workshop of survival. And in some cold places, the signal is unmistakable. At Yana RHS in Siberia, around 33,000 calibrated years ago, archaeologists found sewing tools including eyed needles and awls. That does not mean every group wore the same outfit, or that every climate demanded the same solution. It means that in a high-latitude world where exposed skin could fail quickly, people had the equipment to make fitted insulation and keep it usable. That last part matters most. Keep it usable. Clothing is not finished when the garment is made. It begins a second life of repairs. Seams split, soles thin, ties snap, wet mittens stiffen into boards, fur mats. Smoke dries one edge while snow soaks another. A torn hood in good weather is work. A torn hood in wind is an alarm. Someone has to scrape, soften, dry, punch, stitch, and restitch, often with sore hands and poor light. The work is quiet, repetitive, and easy to underestimate until the boot opens and the cold finds the foot. This is what the needle proves. Warmth was not a lucky accident wrapped around the body. It was planned, fitted, tested, and repaired every time the weather discovered a weakness. For a while, the seam holds. The foot stays warm. The body keeps moving. Then the flame at camp starts eating its last fuel. The cruel part is that fire needs the very thing cold attacks first: working hands. At night, camp is not peaceful. It is a job site with wind in it. A gust presses against the shelter wall, finds a loose edge, and throws sparks sideways. Someone drops to the hearth, palms close enough to sting, trying to wake a red coal before it fades. Someone else grabs the hide screen before it tears loose. A child is pulled deeper into bedding because the air at the edge of the fire has already gone sharp. A bigger flame is not the answer. Bigger flames eat faster. Before a fire can save anyone, the boring work has already happened. Fuel gathered, fuel carried, fuel broken small, fuel kept dry. Fuel held back for the hours when no one wants to crawl out into the dark. In a wooded place, that is hard labor. In open steppe country, near a thin tree line, or in a frozen landscape where usable fuel is scattered, it becomes a leash. It tells you where camp can be, how long you can stay, and whether one more trip into the wind is worth the heat it might buy. Then the flame has to be protected from the air around it. Wind is not background weather. Wind is an enemy with patience. It can make a hearth burn through precious fuel too quickly, or knock it down until only a pulse of red survives under ash. A low wall, a hide screen, a shallow hollow, an entrance turned away from the worst gusts. None of this has to look heroic. It only has to slow the theft. Fire, by itself, was never a superpower. It was a maintenance loop. Bank the coals. Feed the smallest sticks first. Keep damp tinder out of the snow. Watch the smoke. Save an ember. Do it again. If the hearth dies at the wrong hour, darkness is only the first problem. After that comes stiff fingers, wet fuel, cold food, crying children, and the terrible silence of people listening for someone who knows how to restart it. Sleep is the weak point. When bodies stop moving, they make less heat. The fire sinks. The ground keeps pulling warmth away, slowly and without drama. So bedding matters as much as flame. Hides, furs, grasses, brush, anything that lifts a person off frozen earth and traps a little dead air underneath. A damp bed can ruin the work of a good hearth. A thin one can turn a long night into a countdown. What archaeology often preserves are the hard leftovers of this routine: hearths, ash lenses, charcoal, burnt bone, repeated traces of fire use. Those marks do not give us every gesture. They do show that fire was not a single heroic moment. It was a schedule. Cook, dry, see, repair, warm the hands, keep the ember alive until morning. The shelter holds. The bedding holds. The watcher keeps the coals breathing. Then the fuel pile shrinks. And in some places, people reached for stranger building material than wood. Mammoth bone. Real, remarkable, and easy to misunderstand. A mammoth is not a trophy. It is a hardware store, a pantry, and, if the country is open and treeless enough, maybe your roof. The famous mammoth bone house is not fantasy. In parts of Central and Eastern Europe, archaeologists have found structures and activity areas made with mammoth skulls, jaws, tusks, long bones, stones, earth, hides, and whatever else the ground could offer. Some look like rings. Some look like piled architecture. Some may have been dwellings, workspaces, storage places, windbreaks, or buildings that changed jobs with the season. So yes, they were real. No, they were not the standard Ice Age suburb. Treat one as engineering, and the first enemy is not cold, it is moving air. Wind steals heat faster than still air, so the structure does not have to feel comfortable by modern standards. It has to slow the robbery. A jaw can brace an edge. A long bone can serve as a pole where straight timber is scarce. A skull can weight a hide line. Stones and frozen earth can plug the gaps. Hide turns the skeleton into a wall. A smoke opening keeps the inside from becoming a choking pit. Bedding lifts bodies off ground that wants to drink heat through the back. Nothing here is decoration. Every piece has a job. And every job has a cost. A roof made from giant bones is not a clever trick someone tosses together at dusk. Heavy pieces have to be dragged, sorted, fitted, weighted, and repaired. Coverings tear. Lashings loosen. Snow changes the shape of a wall. Smoke stains the roof. Children need watching. Blades need resharpening. Hides need scraping. Meat has to be guarded from animals and from people outside the group who may be just as hungry. Time is a building material. So are backs, hands, memory, and patience. That is why the caution matters without killing the wonder. At different sites, The bones may come from hunting, scavenging, natural piles, older deposits, or repeated reuse. The buildings may not all have done the same thing. Some may not be houses in the simple modern sense. Fine. The stronger lesson still stands. Ice Age people were not following one master plan. They were reading a local problem and answering with whatever the land had already made possible. If wood is missing, bone becomes frame. If stone is useful, stone becomes weight. If hide is available, hide becomes weather. If the wind is the killer, architecture begins as a break. Seen from above, the mammoth bone structure shrinks to a dot on the map, brilliant but local. Around it are other camps, other materials, other diets, other seasons, other failures. The internet wants one iconic image. Survival did not work that way. Still, inside that dot, the roof holds. The gusts lose some force. The fire wastes less heat. People sleep a little longer. Then morning comes, and the bodies under those hides need to burn something. A shelter can save heat, but it cannot create calories. If the next meal is too lean, if the fat is gone, if hauling and repairing cost more than the landscape gives back, the walls have only bought time. The real question is whether the land can still afford the people living on it. You can have fire and still die if dinner is too lean. Cold does not stop at the skin. It puts the whole body on night duty. While people sleep, organs keep burning fuel to hold that narrow temperature line. In deep cold, warmth turns into arithmetic. What did the hunt cost? How much fat is left when the children lie down? So the story cannot end with the kill. The spear in the air is only a moment. The harder scene is the carcass on the ground, hands slick, breath steaming. Stone edges moving quickly because meat stiffens, blood disappears into snow, and fingers get clumsy when they cool. A dead animal is not dinner yet. It is a deadline. The first cuts open the hide. That hide may become bedding, wrapping, a patch, a door flap, warmer feet for a child. Scrapers clean it before rot or freezing spoils the work. Tendons are saved for cord and stitching. Bones are sorted for tools, marrow, and sometimes fuel where wood is scarce. The long bones matter tonight because marrow is not a bonus. It is heat. A mammoth, a bison, a horse, a reindeer, whatever the local world offered, was not simply meat. It was fat, grease, marrow, hide, sinew, bone, and time packed into one dangerous gift. Fat gets treated almost like treasure because fat is dense energy. Lean meat can fill the stomach and still fail the body if the work has been brutal enough. Protein matters, but it is not the same as fuel for a cold night. In hard winter conditions, people can keep chewing and still lose ground. Warmth is something you eat. Archaeology cannot give us the smell of rendered grease, or the argument over who gets the richest pieces, but it leaves hard clues. At Paleolithic sites, researchers find butchery cut marks and long bones cracked in ways that fit marrow extraction. Fresh bone breaks differently from old weathered bone. Those patterns show people going past the obvious meat, breaking into the animal for hidden calories. The tools tell the same story from another angle. Blades cut flesh and hide. Scrapers prepare skins. Burins and hard edges help work bone, antler, and other materials. This was never just one weapon and one brave hunter. It was a whole workbench. And under all of it sits the cruel equation. You need energy to get energy. Hunting spends heat before it brings any back. Walking through snow spends heat. Dragging meat back spends heat. Carrying a child spends heat. Staying awake to watch the fire spends heat. Even success comes home with a bill. That is why processing and sharing were not soft details around the edge of survival. They were risk control. A carcass had to be divided, preserved where possible, moved, hidden, and eaten in the right order. Marrow and grease could not only belong to the strongest arm, because tomorrow that arm might be injured, empty, or dead tired. A camp that spread calories well spread risk. In the smoke, the line keeps moving. One person cuts, one cracks bone, one stretches hide, one keeps children away from the blades, one feeds the fire just enough to work by. Nobody there is doing background labor. They are feeding the heat engine. By now the camp can solve many cold problems. The seam can be repaired, the flame can be nursed, the hide can block wind, but all of it depends on the land paying back the effort. Then one season, it does not. The herds pass farther away. Fuel takes longer to gather. The richest bones are fewer. The walk costs more than the return. Survival stops being only a question of endurance inside one camp. It becomes a question of when to leave. The blizzard gives you something to fight. The quieter danger comes after, when you walk the usual loop and realize the land has stopped answering. No fresh tracks, no birds. The stream edge is sealed hard. The places that used to give meat, fuel, and warning signs have gone blank. The seam holds, the fire holds, the shelter holds, then the country around it fails. That is the second hook of Ice Age survival. Endurance could become the trap. Staying warm in one camp meant less and less if that camp sat inside a landscape that could no longer feed the effort. On a map, the turn looks simple. Ice expands, plant zones shift, herd routes bend away, habitable pockets remain while harsher country empties out. Climate reconstructions and settlement patterns point to those shifts. Ancient DNA adds the harder background. Bottlenecks, mixing, movement, persistence in some regions, disappearance, or replacement in others. But no one lived on a clean map. A refugium sounds safe. It was not. It was a pocket of relative livability, where water, plants, animals, shelter, and fuel might still overlap enough for people to survive. Less impossible is not the same as easy. Put that map back into human hands. Leaving means packing the things that keep bodies alive. Hides, cordage, blades, scrapers, a working awl, dry tinder if you have it, maybe an ember nested in bark or fungus and guarded like an infant. Leaving means children who cannot walk far, elders who know the route but cannot move fast, and injuries that turn every mile into a decision. It means abandoning a windbreak you built, a cache you trusted, a place where you knew which hollow held snowmelt and which ridge caught animals. Staying can kill you slowly. Leaving can kill you in one bad crossing. There is no heroic arrow marked south. Rivers freeze, break, flood, and vanish under snow. Ice crust hides holes. A sheltered valley can become a wind funnel. A place you hope is empty may already belong to another hungry group with its own reasons not to share. Movement was not wandering. It was judgment under pressure. Follow the animals too late, and you starve behind them. Move too early, and you may walk away from food that would have held another week. Wait for certainty, and certainty may arrive as silence. This is what the lone survivor fantasy misses. A route is more than geography. It is memory under strain. It is someone saying the berries failed here last cold season. The herd crossed there after the thaw. The old camp beyond the ridge had fuel. The river ice killed a man. When the map starts moving, the most important tool is no longer something you can hold. It is the group's ability to decide, remember, teach, and survive the decision together. One bad season can erase a camp, but if knowledge moves with people, the camp is not the only thing that lives. The real Ice Age advantage shows up in the least glamorous corner of camp, the corner that never makes the poster. Picture the inside of a shelter on a bad night. Wind keeps slapping the walls like it wants in. The fire is down to a tight orange heart under ash. Someone is portioning dried meat into fair piles. Someone else is easing a cough with warm water, and whatever counts as medicine in a world without medicine. And in the best light they can steal from the coals, a person is stitching. This is repair. A torn boot seam, a split mitten, a hood that will not close. In the Ice Age, a gap in your clothing is not a little discomfort. It is an open door for deadly cold to start moving into your fingers, then your hands, then your judgment. You do not die dramatically. You die after making one dumb decision because your body is screaming for heat. That is the part people miss when they ask how humans survived the Ice Age. Ancient humans were not naturally built for that kind of cold. They survived by combining clothing, fire, shelters, food, tools, mobility, and cooperation. In some places, survival meant staying warm. In others, it meant leaving for refugia where life was still possible. At the end of this story, notice what runs underneath all those parts: people, memory, and repair. The Ice Age was not one frozen moment. It had climate swings, and the last glacial maximum, around 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, was one of the harshest phases. If your group got pinned in the wrong place during the wrong stretch, you did not get a second chance. The landscape did not care that you had a good spear. The landscape asked a colder question. Can your group keep the whole portable climate running every day, for years, with children, injuries, sickness, and bad luck included? Here is the hidden labor graph of a single day, the part archaeology and anthropology force us to respect. Fuel has to be gathered, carried, and kept dry. That means hours of walking and lifting, usually into wind, sometimes onto ice, always with the risk that your hands will lose fine movement. Water has to be found where it is not locked up or fouled by cold and mud. Food has a long chain behind it. It is tracked, hunted, butchered, hauled, cut, dried, stored, guarded from scavengers, and shared. Tools have to be maintained. Stone edges dull, handles loosen, bindings rot. You need scrapers to turn hide into something that will not freeze into a stiff board. You need awls to punch holes. And if you have a tiny-eyed needle, you can do the trick that matters most in wind. You can close gaps. You can tailor. You can make clothing that fits like a seal instead of flapping like a cape. Here is the stake, the one that is easy to ignore from the comfort of a heated room. All of that work competes for the same daylight and the same calories. You cannot gather fuel, hunt, watch kids, keep the fire alive, scrape hides, cook, stand guard, and also be the only person who knows how to sew a boot that will not kill you. A lone Ice Age hero is a modern fantasy. The real survivor was the group. This is where the needle becomes a social object. A needle only saves you if the knowledge to use it spreads through the camp, instead of living in one person's hands. If your only sewer gets sick, or injured, or does not come back from a trip, the portable climate starts leaking. And in deadly cold, leaks compound. You can see the logic even when the clothing itself is gone. Hides and fibers rot. The needle is small enough to survive in the ground, and the rest of the toolkit appears around it. Scrapers, awls, blades, and the bone and antler work that turns animal bodies into insulation. Some cold region sites preserve strong evidence of sewing technology, including the high-latitude Siberian site of Yana RHS, where eyed needles and needle fragments point to serious clothing work far from gentle climates. That does not mean every group everywhere had the same kit. It means this was a real solution humans had access to, and when they had it, it changed what was survivable. Now add the part we are not always comfortable saying out loud. Survival in the Ice Age demanded social discipline. Food sharing is risk management, not a cute moral lesson. Hunting is spiky. One day you hit big, one day you miss. And cold punishes a miss brutally. A group that spreads the food spreads the risk. That keeps hunters alive long enough to hunt again. It keeps kids alive long enough to become adults who remember the routes. Childcare works the same way. You cannot run a mobile life, gather fuel, process hides, and keep a fragile fire alive if every adult is constantly pinned to one child. Humans are built for cooperative breeding, which is a fancy way of saying the village is a survival technology. Somebody watches the small ones, while somebody else makes the dangerous walk for fuel, and that trade helps keep the portable climate from collapsing. Care for the injured is another quiet clue. When archaeology shows healed bones, or people who lived after major trauma, it suggests they were not abandoned the moment they slowed down. That kind of care costs calories and time. In deadly cold, carrying an injured person, feeding them, keeping them warm, and protecting them from infection is expensive. So why would a group do it? Because losing people is expensive too. Emotionally, yes. Logistically, absolutely. Every adult is a library of routes, seasons, mistakes, and fixes. They remember where wind funnels through a valley and turns a normal walk into a frostbite trap. They remember which river crossing is safe when the ice is thinning. They remember where a certain kind of stone can be found to refresh tool edges. They remember how to smoke meat so it keeps, and how to scrape a hide so it stays flexible. Memory is warmth. And the Ice Age punished groups that lost their libraries. Now, twist the knife one more time. Climate swings mean the rules change. The hunting ground that fed you last year can go dead. The best move might be to leave, to gamble on a refugium, to admit the land has won for now. That decision cannot be made by one ego with a spear. It has to be argued, remembered, and agreed on by people who are also thinking about children, elders, and the injured. Cooperation is not just being nice. It is making hard group calls before the cold makes them for you. This is the modern distortion I cannot stand. We worship conquest stories. We want the Ice Age to be a highlight reel of mammoths and hero shots. Most survival was maintenance, reliability, redundancy, teaching. The winning groups were the groups that kept fixing problems before problems became funerals. So go back to that shelter. A hand turns the needle. Thread bites through hide. A seam closes. The boot becomes a boot again. The fire gets fed. The meat piles get handed out. A child's feet get checked and rewrapped. The wind keeps trying to steal heat from the walls, but inside, the portable climate holds. That tiny needle is proof of a system that lives in people. And that raises the next, slightly uncomfortable question to keep us moving. If you picked one object from this whole Ice Age kit, not a spear, not a mammoth skull, one ordinary thing, and followed its entire survival chain from raw materials to warm sleep, what would you discover that we still get wrong about prehistoric survival? If you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for future videos.